don't be afraid to fail in public, because amazing things happen when you're not afraid. We grew up in a culture where, it's pretty common for people to say, "Log kya kahenge," which means, what will people say? People are so crippled by the thought of what people will think of me. What's the worst that can happen? People think that what you were building didn't work out. And it's okay. As soon as I overcame that, I focused more on how do I actually solve this? And then my mindset just became more problem solving than thinking of the problem. Forget Resale future. My dream would be where it's normalized to pass on your garments.
Welcome to the Bay HQ podcast, where we inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asian entrepreneurs. Today we have with us Tanya Gupta, who's a founder of Resale Future, which empowers fashion brands to include circularity. How are you doing today, Tanya?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
So you've got a really interesting background.
Mm-hmm.
You went from science to investment banking and so on. Did you ever think when you were growing up you'd ever become an entrepreneur and building your own business?
Surprisingly, yes. So if you think back to where I grew up, so I grew up in India. I lived in Bombay until I was 14. Very luckily, I got a scholarship, which allowed me to move to the UK. So if you really think about where I started from, it sounds crazy to people when I say this, but I did have conviction that I would be a founder, only because there were so many things, even as a child, like I wanted to fix and I wanted to do things, I saw things a bit different to how it was being done. And I very quickly noticed that in order to fix it, you just have to do it yourself. It's just the way I was brought up. I didn't depend on people, and I think that's why I always thought I would be a founder.
And what did you study at university?
So I studied biochemistry. I was always very interested in genetics and bioengineering, and that's why I naturally gravitated towards. But there was always something that was inside me when I was growing up, especially at university, where I saw what was going on in the fashion world, and I saw what was going on in the way people were consuming. And it just I knew there was a better way of solving this, particularly with tech. There was so many inefficiencies. It was crazy that at university there would be, 5 of us who had the same top, but we would go out and buy it instead of just going to their door and asking them for it. And I didn't grow up like that. I grew up in a culture where we did really use hand-me-downs, and it was just something that was very normal. And when you grow up in India, you really see how fashion is affecting the environment, people's working conditions. It is something that is your reality in terms of, the water you drink or the air you breathe. So for me, it was something I knew wasn't being done right, and I knew I could fix it.
So initially you went into a more corporate career, right?
Yeah.
And what was the thinking behind that? Was it, because you said at university all you knew about this problem and you wanted to solve it, but what made you go into a corporate career first and then later on?
Any entrepreneur who's watching this will know it's really difficult to have that, just to make that jump. It's hard. Everyone needs to, number one, I wanted to learn. I don't think I knew anything about business. I wanted to be as prepared as possible, and finance seemed like the way I could actually, understand different companies, different industries in a short period of time. It was also a job that was very demanding, similar to running a business. It was the opportunity to meet a lot of people, meet a lot of intelligent people. And that's just a career that made most sense to me. I did have the opportunity to work as a private equity consultant. There were companies that were in the high growth phase. They were building something. It was very interesting to me. And that's when I went into, investment banking for private equity transactions at the time, and then into technology, because that's what I ultimately was interested in doing.
Were you ever thinking that maybe you'd get trapped in the corporate world where, because it was going well, and you said you enjoyed it, right?
Yeah.
If you're enjoying it, then taking that leap to do your own thing must be even scarier, because it's not like you're leaving something which you hate and you want to escape. So how did that decision come about? When was the right moment for you to leave?
Yeah, I didn't think I would get trapped in it. For me, I didn't feel trapped. The way I've always lived and wanted to work is I need to be constantly learning. And I felt like I always did that at my job. Like even when I got too comfortable, I would change teams or pick up new projects. And it was very important to me to constantly learn. And then it got to a point where, my mission was too strong to ignore. It was also, it's not just, when I quit my job, it wasn't just because I hated my life and it was really long hours, because I was doing 4 a.m.s almost every day. It was because like I knew that, you know, the way people were consuming isn't normal. It's something that we've never seen before. And unfortunately, it isn't, I'm not someone who's going to shame people for consuming that much either. I think that there is a cultural reason why people are doing it. It's not right. But I think that we needed to solve it in a different way. Instead of shaming people for consuming, we need to think about why they're doing it and how can we make that process easier. And I think I sort of saw ways to do that people weren't working on. And that for me was really exciting. And then the second thing was I wanted to build a company where people were happy to work. And I worked in pretty male-dominated industries. So even when I was at Imperial, it was pretty male-dominated. And even when I was in finance, it was. And I felt like it wasn't like I wanted to build an environment where people enjoyed working. And they were working towards a mission. They knew what they were doing, why they were doing it. And, you know, it was supporting their creativity and their own ambitions and their own, you know, entrepreneurial spirit.
And what were the first steps you took when you started? You said you had different ideas you could do. What were the first steps you took to make it a reality?
So the first step I took was creating a pitch deck. You know, it's just, you write down, you know, what the problem is, how you're solving it, who the market is, why it's important, what the industry is. So I sort of, you know, after working 4 a.m.s on the weekends, I would be working on this pitch deck. Even if I took a holiday or days off, I was working on my pitch deck because this was really important to me. And then I started speaking to people. So generally, like I would go out and just speak to random people. I would go to a lot of networking events in the sustainable fashion space as well as entrepreneur space, and just trying to, you know, learn as much as possible. Again, when I was going to the sustainable fashion space, you know, rental was really booming at the time. And it's a brilliant concept. It's a brilliant idea. I don't think it works for everyone. And that's what I noticed, that people still found it pretty expensive. You know, the thinking about things as using it just once and spending, you know, 100, 200 pounds is still for a certain segment of society, and it works. It's just not for everyone. And that's what I wanted to, that's where, you know, I was just gathering all this information. Speaking to people is the best advice I can give, because there will be so many people who are like, I don't understand what you're doing, but it gives you ideas of what, you know, people will not get what you're doing, especially if it's something innovative, especially if it's something that's not been done before, and that's okay. But I think that's the best advice I can give, is talk about your idea. I didn't do that very early on, where I didn't want to tell people my idea. You know, I always thought, oh my God, someone's going to steal my idea. That doesn't happen. It takes, when you start a business, you kind of know how much work it takes to make an idea a reality. So not everyone has that time, but that actually got me so much feedback. And in fact, the business I started off with eventually pivoted to what it is today.
And just on that point about the idea, because I get this all the time when people want me to sign NDAs for any idea they've had. And the ideas themselves are basically useless. Yeah. Because it's all in the execution, right?
Absolutely.
And when people think about this and they try to stop the idea getting out there, the problem is what happens is you don't then get the feedback you need.
Absolutely.
To iterate it.
Yeah.
And from that's where it actually comes from. And the thing is, when you have an idea, if you then go to pitch to investors, but the first time anybody's hearing the idea is the actual investors themselves, they're going to pick it apart because nobody's ever seen it. And what your advantage is, especially at the early stages, is if you can say you've talked to 100 people about this idea and they get it and they think it's something valuable, that then helps you with investors because you actually know what the questions that people ask, what are the concerns people have. So rather than it being an investor who's like, oh, well, have you thought about this? And no, I haven't. Then you're in trouble. But if it's already been out there, you've talked to so many people, that's where it can get better. And you mentioned there about the pivot. Can you talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I quit my job just before the pandemic, where I was working on, you know, a B2C concept. So my idea was, you know, the reason why people don't use resale is because it's not fashionable. So often when you look at eBay, or back then when you did look at eBay, it was sort of people putting clothes from 5-10 years ago. And that's not something that's fashionable. Or if you want, when you have a certain amount of money that you want to spend on a new dress, you're going to want something new. And unfortunately, that's just how our brains are. We do get a dopamine hit when we do get something new. And I just thought about how can we reinvent what new means to people, right? And so the initial concept was about keeping things in season. So when people bought something and they were wearing it once and they were posting about it, thinking about how can I pass it on immediately so it's actually of value to someone. And then, you make, the maximum amount of money back as well. And then, the more and more I talked to brands, it was very clear that brands wanted to be part of this conversation. They wanted to take part in this economy. They just didn't have the bandwidth to, which is really fair. There's some companies that they're so focused on creating, producing right, producing small quantities, not mass producing like fast fashion. And unfortunately, they're the people that were missing out on this circularity opportunity. So that's when I started to think, how can I actually help them and help the customers? Because the two biggest hurdles customers have with resale is it's time consuming to sell products. I mean, we all have clothes in our wardrobe that we're not going to wear, but we don't have the time to, sit and list it. And the second thing is authenticity. You want to know that it's come from the right place. If I set out to solve those two problems through the brand, it was actually a way, it was an easier way to do this. And the way it works now is when you buy clothes, you can go to your order history and resell products from there. So that takes out the time it takes. It's in 30 seconds, you can list a product. So, we have the data of when you bought it, what size, what color, everything is there. And, that data wasn't being leveraged. And the brands can do that because, they have your order history. And the customers, we're very used to returning items. We go to our order history to return items. So now, it's just an added layer of circularity. So instead of going to the third-party platforms that exist, you would just go to your order history.
Yeah. And then how did you make this a reality in terms of actually building it? Because do you have the tech background yourself, or how did you create the platform?
So very luckily, I shouldn't say luck because I worked very hard for this, but I managed to do a successful crowdfunding and received 2 Innovate UK grants. And, people liked the idea, they liked the concept, they saw what it was doing to the environment and how consumption was, through the roof. And that helped me, hire someone who was very skilled at building these plugins. And, a team. Essentially, the team is great. And yeah, I don't have a technical background. I do know how to code, but it's not at the level required. But that being said, there are 10,000 other things that needs to be done, and I take care of that.
Yeah, and like I said, you need to have the different skills in the team.
100%.
And when people try to do everything by themselves, sooner or later it's going to break, right? You need that different team around you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 different interesting things you mentioned there. So first is the crowdfunding in Innovate UK. And you always said you were working on the pitch deck right early on and iterating on it. Is it the pitch deck that got you that funding, or how did you go about that?
The pitch deck was the concept, right? You need to get buy-in from, customers. You need to get buy-in from even the people who work for you. I mean, no one's just going to take out their time and energy to work on a concept that they don't believe in. So the pitch deck was definitely a starting point to get buy-in from people. But when it comes to Innovate UK or applying, it's a skill in grant writing. It's a lot of work. I've never paid anyone to write my grants, but I know it's a very common thing to do, and it is something that most people do. It is a massive application form, and fair enough, right? Like, Innovate UK is taxpayer money. They need to know why this is an important thing and why you can't go to an investor and get that seed funding. And it needs to be something that's very innovative. So it might work, it might not work, and but if I do get the Innovate UK funding, it's something that has the opportunity to bloom. So It's a hard process. The pitch deck helped, but there are a lot of applications that you need to write, and the reality is most you won't get because there's a very strict criteria. But you sometimes you get them.
Do you have any advice for anybody who wants to do their own, like apply to Innovate UK or similar organisations?
There is a skill to writing it, and unfortunately, it's sort of like, when you're writing an exam, there is a mark scheme, right? You can have all the knowledge in the world, and you can be really interested in reading all the books about it, but if you don't answer it in the way they want to receive it, you're not doing very well. And I learned that the hard way. And that's the biggest advice I can say is really look at all the information there is available on mark schemes, because it is out there. Each award has, a video where they will go through a presentation of who's marking it. You can ask Q&A if you have anything specific. And I think you just need to prepare in advance before the deadline, because if you do have questions, shoot them across to them and you'll get good guidance.
And you mentioned there as well how the pitch deck also helps you to get the team on board, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you're trying to get people on board to a new startup where it's just you at the beginning, and you've got to convince them that this is something worth them leaving whatever they're doing right now to come and join you, that's obviously very intimidating for a lot of people, right? To join a company at their early stages. And it's a two-way street. Like, how did you, one, pick the right people to join you, but also convince them that this is the right place for them too?
Yeah, so the pitch deck, right? I think people saw the mission and they saw that the way tech can change this. And I think it's you're either someone who's excited about change or you're someone who's comfortable with how things are going. And I think I managed to find people who were excited about change, and that's been really important to me. So I worked in finance where there were some people who didn't enjoy what they were doing, and I was very clear that it's just not good for anyone, right? If you're just doing it because you need to and you don't enjoy what you're doing, it's not good for the company or the person. And for me, it was very clear, if you like what we're creating, you're going to figure out how to do it. I mean, there's so many things as an entrepreneur I've figured out how to do, and any entrepreneur will know this, that there's just so many hats you have to wear, and you figure it out. But what is important is that the why is always there. And that's how I found people. And
you mentioned early on about part of the reason why you wanted to create your own company is about that culture and creating an environment where people really enjoy their jobs. How are you going about that now? How are you implementing that and making sure that your team are loving what they're doing still? Because obviously they believe in the mission. There's so many other factors to making sure that they're happy and their well-being is really good as well.
So at the moment, the team is really small. It is an international team. So I do have someone who works in Canada because, we're trying to break into the North America space. I do have someone in India and someone in London. So there are 4 of us. And it's hard, it's living in this, remote world it's not easy to navigate. But luckily, it's so far so good. There is a lot of flexibility, which is something that I thought was really important. And I think people value that they're not being, treated for, I don't believe in the whole, you have to wake up at 9 and be at your desk to be someone who's a high achiever. And I think that's something that people really appreciate, especially post-COVID, is giving them flexibility.
And with the team being international, how you bring them together? How are you making sure their relationships with each other are strong as well?
I mean, it's again, that's a difficult one. But, we have our meetings and, we have our weekly catch-ups of, what everyone's doing. And that's how we're managing to do it at the moment. But it's a very small team. And, that's something that as the team grows, I'm going to definitely have to keep that in mind. But so far, so good.
And you mentioned before we started recording how you've got a few exciting launches coming up at the moment.
Yes.
And tell us about that. Share your wins.
Yeah. There is a multi-brand, multi-designer store based in Scotland that is about to launch. They have about 5 stores and, online. But, they stock brands like Bash or, Stein Goya or, just many designers. And now that if you shop with them or shop online on their store, you could very easily rotate these dresses or outfits. You could sell them when you're done. Like, this dress, for example, if I've worn it all winter and, when it comes to summer, I'm thinking, I want something that's a bit more summery. I could resell it and get something new. But what that does is it passes it on to someone who actually is interested in that brand already and, is likely to wear it. Unfortunately, when you do send things to charity shops, they're not always, I think it's only 25% of the garments that are actually resold. Most go to landfill. Unfortunately, most are shipped over to, developing countries to be burned. And it's not something that, of course, there are clothes that are end of life. And, I still haven't found a way what to do with those kind of clothes. And, there are a lot of cool companies that are working on processing it. But, if there's something that is of good quality and, people, if you sell it to them, they're more likely to wear it.
Yeah. And so you've got 2 launches coming up.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. So the second launch is a brand called Kanya London. And they are actually a South Asian brand. They sell these amazing outfits. They're saris, but they're also, you're able to wear them in a Western setting. They're kind of like these fusion garments. Amazingly, they also sell on ASOS. They're pretty popular, but her mission, the founder's mission, is very rooted in, helping the people who create her garments and, creating jobs for them, creating education opportunities for their children. And, it was really exciting to work with them because, unfortunately, in the Asian community, our garments people wear them once or twice because they are very heavy, they're very, ornate. And, she really understood that, yes, I'm trying to create all of these things, create the garments well, but unfortunately, my customers are not wearing them that much. So I'd love to give them the opportunity to pass them on. So we have those 2 brands that are launching this week and next week. The first one, Biscuit, and the second, Kanya.
So by the time this episode comes out, that should already be live, right?
100%.
So if somebody buys a product from there now as in the time this is released, then they can experience that, right? So seeing the order history, they'll be able to resell it, and they can experience it themselves. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, obviously, I know quite a few clothing brands. So remind me after this podcast to put you in touch with them and I can try and link you up there as well. Have you got other things in the pipeline, or what's the exciting things you're working on?
So there are other things in the pipeline that I won't reveal, but it is around the whole product authenticity piece, which is really exciting. Obviously, right now we are building something that is easy to use and, easy for the customers to use, easy for the brands to use. But, we want to push the boundaries on the product because I do still see ways that we can solve it that companies aren't doing it yet. So I won't reveal what it is, but I will share it pretty soon, hopefully.
So one of the things I learned recently was that often venture capitalists will ask male founders about what their dreams are, and they'll ask female founders about what their struggles are. So I want to make sure I give you the opportunity here to talk about, what is the big dream for this? In 5 years' time, 10 years' time, what would be the perfect world of where Resale Future gets to? It
would be where this is just a norm. Forget Resale Future. My dream would be where customers are it's normalized to pass on your garments. So if you think about it, returns weren't a normal thing until maybe 7-8 years ago. And for me, the dream would be in 10 years, resale is a normal thing. Forget, it doesn't have to be through Resale Future. It's just, for me, it's the idea that you don't need a garment. A garment shouldn't be worn once or twice. And I think in the last 10 years, that's become too common. So if you're not wearing it again, make sure someone else is. I think that's my dream.
And obviously, lots of people listening, we all know that fast fashion isn't good for the planet, right? And sometimes there's this dissonance where people know that, but then still buy it anyway. And with you, how's your journey in convincing some people who maybe are really used to fast fashion? How do you kind of change their minds that they do believe in what you're trying to achieve and to get them on board with reselling their clothes and also buying other people's clothes? Because I think sometimes people have this idea about a stigma related to that. And how do you overcome that?
let's just looking at the data, people are buying fast fashion, even though, they're talking about the environment. We are the most woke, generation, but we're still buying fast fashion. And the data shows that fast fashion is doing amazingly well. So for me, it was trying to understand why, right? There is no point shaming people because there is a reason this is happening. And it's everyone's, it's because of a society that we all play a part of. Even the fact that, we love the fact that celebrities wear clothes once on the red carpet, to the fact that the rise of influencer culture, everything's playing a part to why people are wearing clothes less and why people are shopping fast fashion. So the way I try to solve it is by understanding, and I really take this seriously. I talk to people who, consume in this way. It's very easy for people who are in the sustainable space to live in an echo chamber where they don't understand who these people are, okay? Because I speak to a lot of founders too, and they're like, oh, I've never heard of that before. I'm like, well, it exists. If you look at the data, it exists where people aren't wearing clothes more than once. So for me, understanding why, right? So it's easy to buy and it's great for pictures are some reasons why people are doing it. And if you can solve this while also keeping it cheap, right? Because the reality is people care about how much money they're spending. And unfortunately, maybe, rental isn't solving that yet. It is still much cheaper, and I love rental. I love what it's doing. It's not something I could probably incorporate in my everyday life, but that is a reason why, right? And then that's how, if I can explain to people why it's very similar to them shopping on e-commerce stores. So the whole concept of Resale Future is creating an environment that's secondhand, but it looks exactly like you were buying it firsthand on an e-commerce store. I think that mentality really plays a part on, people spending, the culture of spending. So that's one way I'm trying to solve it. And then the second way is, trying to help people think about what they buy as assets in their wardrobe. And that, comes to the cost aspect. When you buy something, think about it like, oh, I just bought a £100 dress. That is an asset that, I can pass on and maybe recover £80. So everyone is a hustler today. Everyone's an entrepreneur, and really helping people see that and making it easy for them to make that money is how I'm solving it. And unfortunately, we're living in tough times. It's not fair to, it's not right what fast fashion's doing to the environment, but I think people are going through enough struggles where I don't think shaming is the answer. And I'll give you an example. Airbnb, the reason they did well in a time of the financial crisis is because people saw their homes as assets. They saw their spare bedroom as a way to make money. And I think that's going to happen with people, with what's in people's wardrobes.
One of the studies that comes to mind as you were talking about that as well was the whole spotlight effect, right? Where people might rewear their same clothes. And there was somebody who, she wore the same dress for a year to work every single day and nobody noticed. And people compliment her, oh, really nice dress today. And they didn't remember that she wore it yesterday. And I think sometimes there's this culture, maybe it's Instagram or social media, which makes people think that everybody remembers what you wore. And a lot of time people won't, right? And there is the idea of, let's say, like, well, I was about to say I wear a dress. Let's say you wear a dress and then the next week your friend wears it.
Yeah.
People won't necessarily make the connection that's the same dress that your friend wore. But people have this worry that other people are judging them that much.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's remembering that people aren't paying that much attention to you. Mm-hmm. So you can do these things and like increase the lifetime of goods and like dresses and fashion in particular, because actually people aren't judging you as much. And sometimes it's trying to change that culture where it's not shaming people, because I completely agree. If you shame people, it makes them more defensive and they don't listen to your ideas. Whereas if you can explain, look, here's something which is helping the environment and also it will help you save money, it will help you with other things, that's the way you're going to get them on board. And like listening to what you're just talking about as well in terms of what I really liked is where you said that it doesn't necessarily need to be Resale Future. And that's showing that your mission is bigger than like just making money or anything like that. And as you go forward to this, have you got any ideas of different things you can do in terms of education or any other side projects you might do through Resale Future, which then through the education piece could potentially bring people into the product too?
Yeah, like I said, I do live in an echo chamber where I'm surrounded by people who understand the effects of fashion on the environment. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. And I'm very excited about, this piece of through the brands. Brands already have a very loyal following. And I think every time I speak to a brand, that's something that is the most exciting to them is, this is amazing. Like, I get that, now we get to be part of this whole circular conversation, but also, we're making it easy for them. But how about, we take this one step further? How about we educate, why this is important to us, why this is important for the environment? And, it's actually really exciting for me to see, because that's not something I thought brands would be excited about, because ultimately everyone's running a business and, the top line matters. And it's something that to me is pretty exciting, is through the brand's loyal following, we're now able to reach more people to explain the mission, explain what we're trying to do and why it's important.
And you mentioned as well how you had the pivots and you've had different things going on. Was there any points where maybe you did doubt yourself, you had imposter syndrome about whether this would succeed? And how did you get through that? Because I think that's so important for people to hear, is that it hasn't all just been smooth sailing. Mm-hmm. You've overcome these different things. And when other people hear hurdles, they know, well, Tanya did it. She had a hurdle when she got through it. Yeah. And it makes people believe in themselves too.
It is true that, entrepreneurship is the hardest thing you're going to do. Unfortunately, social media has made it look very rosy and easy. It's just not how it is. During the pandemic, especially, so I quit my job before the pandemic and was working on an idea, and very quickly, started to understand there was a better way of solving it, a bigger way of solving it, a more efficient way of solving it. And to let go of an initial idea that, frankly, I had from university was difficult, but so important, knowing that. I think the best advice I can give anyone is don't be afraid to fail in public. We grew up in a culture where, it's pretty common for people to say, log kya kahenge, which means, what will people say? And I think people are so, I was so crippled by the thought of what people will think of me. And I think very early on when, you are working just with yourself, and that sort of thought can consume you. And then the day you realize no one cares, so earlier, you were saying that no one really cares about wearing things twice. I completely agree with that. No one cares. And I also think no one cares what you're actually, taking a risk. It's not going to work out for years maybe, or, or months. And that's okay if you're comfortable with it. I think that we could, if you're not afraid to fail in public, you can then overcome those lows and highs, right? Because there are so many lows and so many moments of self-doubt. And, what's the worst that can happen? People think that what you were building didn't work out. And it's okay. I think for me, as soon as I overcame that, I focused more on how do I actually solve this? And then my mindset just became more problem solving than thinking of the problem. It was just every time there was an issue, the first thing you think about is problem solving. And it's really funny because my friends hate this about me, because they'll be ranting and I'll be talking about the solution and they're like, no, you just want to rant. Like, tell us we're right and how we're thinking. And I think that if you can train your brain to think like that, you will always find a solution and overcome those lows.
One thing I find interesting as well, you said about how, I'm not going to repeat the Hindi because I've got terrible Hindi.
Yeah.
But the idea of the different cultures, right? And a lot of people from Asian backgrounds in this country also think the same way as Indian background back home. But in terms of how people have perceived your business, have you found a difference in your circles back home versus your circles in India versus your circles in London? Have they reacted differently, or has it been quite similar in the way that they're looking at your product?
In our generation, people see why this is important, but maybe in the older generation, they don't. And that's okay. I think it's fair. I think everyone had their own experiences growing up. I think we're quite privileged, right, in our generation where we have the opportunities we've seen people. For me, I think having role models is a big privilege that people don't have. And it gives you that confidence, it gives you that energy and, someone you could reach out to if you have a problem and ask questions. And I think in the older generation or my parents' generation, they didn't have that. So I get why people may not understand what I'm doing or why they think it's so crazy. I left finance or I left science and started to work in fashion, in tech, and something that is a secondhand, which maybe they would never use. I get those questions all the time, but not from our generation, actually.
So we're going to have to move on to a quick fire questions now at the time.
Okay.
But I could talk forever. So the first one is, who are 3 British Asians that you'd like to give a shout out to? One
of my really good friends, Akash Mehta, he has been someone I went to university with, had many lows and highs together, but he's been a great help in just, he's someone that is really helpful and you could, go on his Instagram and he's always giving business advice, and that's someone, he is the founder of Fable and Main. A second person who was personally very helpful to me growing up, because I saw a role model who could, achieve all these great things, was my cousin, Roma Agrawal. She is the head engineer who helped build the Shard at the time. So, she's also an author, doing a lot to help, women get into STEM subjects, someone who's super inspirational to me. And I recommend, you read her books and just watch her videos. And a third person would be someone I actually follow on Instagram. I don't really know her well, but I'm not very good on Instagram. I'm not very good on social media, so she's an inspiration. She is a founder of Kanims. It's a fashion brand. Her name's Rokeya, and she's of Bangladeshi descent. And just the work she's doing and the way she's building her brand, and how ethically she's trying to help, the artisans that make her clothes, and it's just very inspirational. Also, I think she's amazing because she's a mother and wears so many hats, and inspiring to me.
Yeah, so make sure you give them a follow. And the next question is, what's something that people could reach out to you for if they're looking for help?
I think overall, just taking that first step of starting a business, it's a really hard decision. I didn't do it in a way where I got help from people. I sort of learned it myself. So, whether it's, grant writing or finding where they exist, or, helping with the pitch deck, I would be very happy to help people in that.
And then on the flip side, what's maybe somebody's listening right now?
Yeah.
How could they help you?
So I'm very terrible at social media and PR and anything to do with, talking about how amazing the business is, or I'm not very good at that. So if anyone can help in that aspect, then I would welcome it.
So really love chatting today. Have you got any final words?
Don't be afraid to fail, because amazing things happen when you're not afraid of what people think of you because no one's really thinking of you.
Thank you for listening to the Bay HQ podcast today. In our mission to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asian entrepreneurs, it would mean so much to us if you could subscribe to our channel, leave a review and share this with your friends.